It started with a ring, a small, stupid detail, really, but it planted a seed of doubt that grew into something I couldn't ignore. I had just walked into the house after a long day at work, my shoulders aching from another endless round of meetings when I saw it. Her wedding ring, gleaming in the soft evening light, sat abandoned on the bathroom counter. Claire was meticulous about certain habits, and putting her ring back on after taking it off was one of them. "Claire," I called out, keeping my tone casual. "Did you forget something in the bathroom?" She emerged from the bedroom, phone in hand, scrolling through something that seemed to demand her full attention. "What is it?" she asked, briefly glancing up, her tone almost dismissive. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup perfect. She looked like she was heading to a cocktail party, not wrapping up a quiet evening at home. "Your ring," I said, nodding toward the counter. Her eyes flicked to the bathroom, and for a brief moment I saw hesitation. A split second too long before she shrugged and walked past me. "Oh, must have slipped my mind," she said, laughing lightly as she slid it back onto her finger. "You know how scatterbrained I can be." Her tone was nonchalant, but her avoidance of eye contact didn't sit right with me. My gut told me there was more to this than forgetfulness. It wasn't just the ring. Over the next few weeks, I noticed other things. Patterns that didn't fit. Her work hours suddenly stretched longer, her explanations vague. "The Peterson account is eating up my time," she'd say, brushing off my questions. She always had a reason. Always something just plausible enough to make me question myself, not her. The real cracks began to show on a Saturday. Claire returned from an outing she claimed was with Karen, her best friend. When I casually mentioned it during a golf game with Karen's husband, he gave me a blank look. "Karen?" She spent the day at home. Carter had a soccer game. That was the first real lie I could confirm. Still, I didn't confront her right away. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. 2 weeks later, I found something that made denial impossible. While folding laundry, I noticed a faint smudge on the collar of her pale pink blouse. Lipstick. It wasn't her shade. She wore muted tones, never the bright red that marked the fabric. When I held it up to her that evening, her reaction was instant and defensive. "Karen and I tried on lipsticks at the mall," she said, with a laugh that sounded forced. I must have leaned too close. She waved it off as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Karen again. That name now felt like a shield Claire was using, and it wasn't working. The lie didn't match her usual careful attention to detail. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling. The doubts weren't just whispers anymore. They were shouting. I needed answers, and I knew she wasn't going to give them willingly. By the time I decided to dig deeper, the doubts had grown too large to ignore. Every unanswered question, every vague explanation, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be put together. I just needed the missing links. I started small, careful not to tip my hand. One evening, while Claire was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands were steady, but my pulse quickened. She used the same password for years, something I'd memorized more out of habit than intent. The Messages app opened, revealing the usual suspects: Karen, her colleagues, even her mother. But, as I scrolled, one name caught my eye. M. The thread wasn't long, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. "Looking forward to tomorrow. Don't keep me waiting." The emoji felt like a slap in the face. My instincts had been right, but seeing it spelled out in black and white was something else entirely. Quickly, I took screenshots of the entire conversation and emailed them to myself, deleting the sent mail from her account before locking the phone and setting it back down. The shower stopped as I slipped back onto the couch, pretending to scroll through my own phone. The next step required more action. While Claire was at work, I installed a tracking app on her phone. It was disturbingly easy. Within minutes, I could see her location in real time. That evening, as she headed out for yet another working dinner, I watched the little blinking dot on my screen. It moved steadily across town, stopping at an address I didn't recognize. I wrote the address down and drove there myself, parking a few blocks away. The location led me to a dimly lit restaurant with an upscale vibe, not the kind of place you'd pick for a professional meeting. I stayed across the street, watching. It didn't take long to spot her. Claire sat at a corner table, dressed impeccably in a way she hadn't bothered with for me in months. Across from her was a man. He leaned toward her, his smile too familiar, his hand brushing hers lightly. She didn't pull away. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to storm in. But this wasn't the time for confrontation. I needed more than my anger. The next few days were a whirlwind of discovery. I used every spare moment to gather evidence. The tracking app revealed her patterns, regular visits to the same upscale apartment complex across town. On one occasion, I parked outside and waited. Her silhouette appeared behind the third-floor curtains, and I wasn't surprised to see another shadow moving with hers. I went through her purse while she slept, finding receipts for expensive dinners, boutique purchases, and even a hotel stay, all for places we'd never been together. A quick search of our joint credit card account revealed charges for gifts I'd never seen: jewelry, spa treatments, and even a men's watch. My chest tightened as I realized the extent of her deceit. This wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. The final blow came when I accessed her email. In a folder labeled Travel, I found itineraries for weekend getaways. Each one was booked for 2 people, Claire and Mark Calloway, M. The confirmation emails detailed everything: flights, hotels, and even spa appointments. This was no casual fling. It was a full-blown affair. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. The tracking app showed her at a boutique hotel on the edge of town, not the gym as she had claimed. This time, I didn't hesitate. I drove straight there and walked into the lobby, my pulse hammering in my ears. The receptionist hesitated when I asked for her by name, but finally told me she was in the lounge. My steps felt heavy as I approached, and then I saw them. Claire and Mark sat at the bar, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice me until I was standing right behind them. "Having a good time?" I said, my voice low and cold. Claire's head whipped around, her face draining of color. Mark froze, his hand halfway to his drink. "Ethan," Claire began, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't," I said, my voice trembling with controlled fury. "Save it." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The air between us crackled with tension. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving them behind. My mind was already racing with what I needed to do next. Anger can be chaotic and blinding, but I refused to let it consume me. Once the initial shock passed, my fury turned into cold determination. I wasn't going to let Claire and Mark walk away unscathed. If they thought they could destroy my life without consequences, they were sorely mistaken. The first step was gathering undeniable, airtight evidence. What I had was compelling, but still circumstantial. If I wanted to ensure there was no way for Claire to manipulate the narrative, I needed more. That's when I decided to bring in a professional, a private investigator named Carl, recommended by a colleague who had been through a messy divorce himself. Carl was a no-nonsense guy, his experience evident in the calm, methodical way he handled our first meeting. "If she's cheating, we'll get the proof," he assured me, sliding a notepad across the desk. "Write down all the details you have: times, locations, any habits you've noticed. The more we know, the easier it'll be to track them." Over the next 2 weeks, Carl delivered more than I could have hoped for. He tailed Claire discreetly, documenting everything. Photos of her entering and leaving Mark's apartment at odd hours, arms full of shopping bags. A video of them walking hand in hand down a quiet street, laughing like a pair of lovesick teenagers. Receipts and records from the boutique hotel she had claimed was just for work events. He even managed to record a short conversation between them at a coffee shop, the audio capturing Mark saying, "We'll have to be more careful. I can't risk Ellen finding out." But the most damning piece of evidence came during a stakeout. Carl followed Claire and Mark to a weekend getaway at a luxury resort 2 hours from the city. He managed to snap photos of them by the pool, sipping cocktails and wrapped in each other's arms. Later that evening, he caught them on video through the glass doors of their suite, sharing an intimate dinner before disappearing into the bedroom. There were no gaps in the timeline, no plausible deniability left for Claire to cling to. When Carl handed over the final dossier, I stared at the images and videos in silence, my jaw tight. "This enough for you?" he asked, sliding the thick folder across the table. "More than enough," I replied. Now that I had my evidence, it was time to take action. The first target was Mark. A quick background check revealed he was married with 2 young kids. He also held a prominent position as a regional manager at a major corporation, a position that demanded an impeccable public image. That made him vulnerable. Using a burner email, I contacted his wife, Ellen. I kept my message brief, attaching photos and screenshots of their affair. I didn't need to add much. The evidence spoke for itself. Within an hour, I received a reply. "This can't be real," she wrote, though the shock and devastation were evident. I forwarded more proof, a link to a video Carl had captured, and that was the last I heard from her. A week later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Ellen had filed for divorce. I didn't stop there. Mark's professional reputation was just as important to him as his personal one. Using another burner account, I sent the same evidence to his company's HR department, with a note expressing concern about his conduct and how it could reflect poorly on their brand. 2 days later, Mark was placed on leave pending an investigation. His house of cards was collapsing. Next came Claire. She'd always prided herself on her social standing, her carefully cultivated circle of friends, her reputation as a loyal wife, and her position as the picture-perfect partner. That gave me the perfect stage for her downfall. Her monthly book club meetings were a social highlight among her friends, hosted at our home with wine, snacks, and endless chatter. I decided this would be the setting for my move. I prepared meticulously, printing out the most damning evidence: photos, text exchanges, and receipts. Each item was placed in a sealed envelope marked, "For your eyes only." When the evening arrived, I played the role of the perfect host, smiling and offering drinks as Claire mingled with her friends. She was clearly tense, though I doubted she knew why. When the chatter hit its peak, I stepped into the room. "Ladies," I said, my voice calm but commanding, "sorry to interrupt, but I have something important to share. It concerns Claire." The room fell silent, every head turning toward me. Claire's face went pale. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice wavering. I ignored her, placing the envelopes on the coffee table. "Before we go any further, I think it's only fair that you all know the truth." One by one, her friends opened the envelopes. Gasps filled the room as they flipped through the photos and read the texts. One of them, Jill, looked up, her expression a mix of disbelief and disgust. "Claire, is this true?" Claire stood abruptly, knocking over her wineglass in the process. "This is insane," she snapped, her voice shrill. "Ethan, stop it right now." "Don't bother denying it," I said, my tone icy. "The evidence is all there. Your lies have finally caught up with you." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Her friends sat in stunned silence, exchanging awkward glances. Jill finally spoke. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "None of us did," another woman added quietly. "It's fine," I said, though my voice betrayed the weight of the moment. "You're not the ones who betrayed me." Mark's life unraveled quickly. Ellen made sure their mutual friends knew the truth, and his company terminated him after concluding their investigation. He went from a respected professional to a cautionary tale in a matter of weeks. Claire, meanwhile, found herself isolated. Her social circle evaporated, with even her closest friends distancing themselves from the scandal. She moved into a small apartment, her reputation shattered. For me, the revenge wasn't about pettiness. It was about reclaiming my sense of control and dignity. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. But as satisfying as it was to see them fall, the weight of the betrayal lingered. I wasn't done yet. The fallout wasn't just theirs to endure. Claire didn't come home that night. I didn't expect her to. After the bombshell at her book club, I imagined she'd spend the night at a hotel or Mark's apartment. It didn't matter to me anymore. My focus had shifted. The life we had built together was already over. Now it was about moving forward on my terms. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee as if it held the answers. The silence was almost welcome. It gave me a chance to think clearly for the first time in weeks. The man I was before Claire's betrayal had been blindsided, but that version of me no longer existed. This was about closure and rebuilding. Claire walked in around 10 a.m. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and she looked like she hadn't slept. Her face was a mixture of shame, exhaustion, and defiance. She met my eyes briefly before dropping her gaze to the floor. "We need to talk," she said softly. I gestured for her to sit at the table. She hesitated before sinking into the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavily between us. "How long?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice was calm but cold, stripped of any emotion. She flinched, as though the question was a physical blow. "A few months," she admitted. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything, Ethan. I didn't plan this." I shook my head, disgusted by the familiar script of excuses. "Not supposed to mean anything?" I repeated. "So what? Trips, dinners, hotels?" That's meaningless to you?" Her hands trembled as she wrung them together. "I was unhappy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You were always so busy. It felt like we were just existing. I needed something more." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. "And instead of talking to me, you decided to blow up our marriage? Instead of working through it, you turned to someone else?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she might cry, but I didn't care. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said weakly. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." "No," I said firmly, leaning forward. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or missing an important event. What you did was a choice, a series of deliberate choices. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake." The room fell silent again. Claire seemed to struggle for words, but I wasn't interested in hearing more excuses. I'd heard enough lies to last a lifetime. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said finally, breaking the silence. "The divorce papers will be ready soon. I suggest you get a lawyer of your own." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice desperate. "We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. We'll do counseling. Whatever it takes. Please just don't give up on us." I stared at her, unflinching. "You gave up on us the moment you let him into your life. I don't want to fix this, Claire. I want my life back. And I want it without you." She broke down then, her sobs echoing in the quiet kitchen. But her tears didn't move me. I'd spent too many nights lying awake, my mind racing with doubts and fears, while she was out with Mark. I was done feeling sorry for her. Or for myself. The divorce process moved quickly. Claire didn't contest anything. Whether it was out of guilt or a realization that she couldn't win, I didn't care. I kept the house, my savings, and the life we'd built. She left with a suitcase and a handful of belongings. Word of the affair spread fast, thanks in part to Ellen, Mark's wife, who wasn't shy about sharing the truth. Claire's social circle crumbled. Jill and the other women from her book club cut her off completely. Embarrassed by their association with her, even her closest friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be linked to the scandal. Mark didn't fare any better. His company terminated him after the HR investigation concluded, citing conduct unbecoming of a senior representative. Ellen followed through with her divorce, gaining full custody of their children and selling their family home. Mark ended up renting a small apartment on the outskirts of town, his perfect life reduced to rubble. As for me, life slowly began to find its rhythm again. At first, the house felt empty, like a shell of the life I thought I had. But over time, I started to fill it with new routines, new priorities. I threw myself into work, took up running to clear my mind, and signed up for a photography class, something I hadn't done in years. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I wandered through the park with my camera, I met Sophie. She was adjusting her own camera on a tripod when I noticed her. We struck up a conversation, starting with photography, but quickly moving to other topics. She was kind, direct, and had a wit that made me smile, a rarity in those days. Our connection grew naturally. Coffee turned into dinner, then weekend hikes, then more. Sophie knew about my past, but she didn't pity me. Instead, she admired how I'd handled the fallout and rebuilt my life. For the first time in months, I felt truly seen, not as someone's betrayed husband, but as a person with value beyond the pain I'd endured. Looking back, Claire's betrayal had been the most painful experience of my life, but it had also been a turning point. It forced me to confront who I was, to rebuild myself from the ground up. It reminded me of the strength I had always possessed, but had forgotten. Now, as I sat on a park bench beside Sophie, watching the golden leaves drift lazily to the ground, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. Moving on, building something better, and knowing that I was stronger than the people who tried to tear me down.